Hello, and welcome to VeleraTV. Today, we're joined by Karen Postma, Senior Vice President of Risk Solutions at Velera. Our discussion today centers on consumer-engaged fraud, understanding its dynamics, and how credit unions are working to protect their members. Consumer-engaged fraud is a new topic in the financial services industry. If you could, describe what it is and how to distinguish it from other forms of fraud.
So, from a broad understanding, there's been a lot of influence around fraud done through the consumer, whether that is first party fraud, which I think we've talked about before on here, and then also scams, and really trying to umbrella them under consumer engaged because we need to first classify them and understand them a little bit differently than we do traditional fraud so that we have an opportunity to mitigate them and be able to detect them in a different way. And so, from a Velera perspective, we classified it as consumer engaged. And in that aspect, we've even broken it down a little bit more into misuse and persuaded. I'm really trying to use very general terms so that as these trends evolve, we have a way to be able to capture them.
What is considered consumer misuse, and how can credit unions educate their members about this type of fraud?
Yeah, so misuse is really the broad classification for first party fraud. And so, under that, even you have intentional and unintentional. So, in a first party fraud situation, I might order something and not recognize it when I get it on my statement and report it as fraud. Well, I didn't intentionally report that as fraud. After a while, I call back or, they ask me a few more questions and I'm like, oh, yes, that is mine. I'm sorry. And we can move on. But the rise in intentional first party fraud has been astronomical, and not just from a issuing perspective or a financial institution perspective, but on the merchant side, this is their number one fraud that is reaching. I think last year it reached about $100 million worth of impact to merchants. And so, from that perspective, really trying to classify misuse in those two categories. So then we have an ability to understand that intentional misuse and then be able to put mitigation tools in place on that.
What are your thoughts on consumers approving fraudulent transactions after fraud detection tools have already alerted them of potential fraud taking place?
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of the conundrum we're in, because we're utilizing these systems that have really been designed around third-party fraud, right? Who is the best person to validate whether a transaction is fraud or not? It's the consumer, right? And so that's the way that we've always interacted. However, between first-party fraud and then the persuaded bucket, which really is generalization of scams, the consumer is, yes, I'm doing this, or yes, this go through, for maybe they're being persuaded, maybe they're being socially engineered on that aspect. And so, right now, between these two broad types, it's classifying anywhere from 50 to 80% of our fraud is this consumer engaged. And so, the very difficult part of that is, you're right, our systems at that fraud transactional level are very sophisticated. It's catching a lot of it. But when the consumer interrupts that and approves it, that's when the real damage is done.
Your team has worked diligently to make fraud-fighting resources and tools available to the industry. What is the best way for credit unions to access them?
Our clients can find those materials through our risk community, our Velera risk community page. This is our fraud page that has the ability to educate all of our credit unions around fraud and all of our tools out there. The Consumer Engaged Fraud Guide is there. What we are hoping to evolve to over the next year is the ability for our credit unions to be able to tag those to us, and then we will classify them in our database as the classification, and then take that information and be able to put preventative measures in place utilizing that data.